My ex-girlfriend broke up with me but refused to move out of my house. The old house, a gift from my grandmother, had always been a place of comfort, its familiar rooms filled with the scent of aged wood and the faint, sweet smell of the rose bushes she had planted in the backyard decades ago. For the first 2 years Megan and I lived there, it was our sanctuary, a quiet haven where we built a life together. When she decided to go back to school for her master's degree, the house became a symbol of my commitment to her dreams. I was so proud of her for taking that leap. Her bachelor's degree hadn't opened the doors she had hoped for, and seeing her so determined to create a better future for herself filled me with a deep sense of purpose. I was more than willing to take on the financial responsibility, to be the steady ground beneath her feet while she reached for the sky. In the beginning, it was a partnership. I'd come home from my job at the accounting firm, tired but content, and find her buried in textbooks at the kitchen table, her brow furrowed in concentration. I'd cook dinner, simple meals mostly, but made with love. We'd eat together and she'd tell me about her classes, her eyes lighting up as she explained complex theories I could barely grasp. I'd listen, captivated not by the subject matter but by her passion. I took care of the house, mowing the lawn on Saturdays, scrubbing the floors on Sundays, trying to keep the place as tidy as my grandmother had. It wasn't always perfect. Dust bunnies gathered in the corners and sometimes the laundry piled up, but it was a home filled with the comfortable clutter of a shared life. The shift was gradual, so subtle at first that I barely noticed it. Her program was intense, more demanding than either of us had anticipated. The summer courses she took to accelerate her graduation only added to the pressure. The light in her eyes began to dim, replaced by a constant flicker of anxiety. The easy flow of our conversations dried up, replaced by a tense silence that seemed to suck the air out of the room. Her criticism started small, a passing comment about the way I loaded the dishwasher, a sigh of frustration when I cooked chicken for the third time in a week. I brushed it off, telling myself it was just the stress talking. I tried to be more patient, to offer more support. I'd bring her tea while she studied, rub her shoulders when she complained of a headache, and listen quietly as she vented about her professors and classmates. But my patience began to wear thin as her criticism grew sharper, more personal. My cooking, once a source of comfort, was now a constant disappointment. "Is this all you know how to make?" she'd ask, pushing her food around her plate with a fork. My cleaning, which I had always taken pride in, was suddenly inadequate. "I can't concentrate in this mess," she'd say, gesturing vaguely at a stack of mail on the counter. I felt like I was walking on eggshells in my own home, constantly bracing myself for the next complaint. I suggested she take a break, maybe go for a walk with me or watch a movie, but she always refused, saying she had too much work to do. The house, our sanctuary, began to feel like a pressure cooker. The air was thick with unspoken resentment. I started to withdraw, spending more time in the garage, tinkering with my old car just to have a space where I didn't feel like I was being judged. I missed the woman I had fallen in love with, the one who had laughed at my bad jokes and appreciated my simple dinners. I didn't know how to bring her back. The final argument was explosive, a culmination of months of simmering tension. It started over something trivial, a forgotten item on the grocery list, but it quickly escalated into a torrent of accusations and hurt feelings. She accused me of not caring about her, of not understanding the pressure she was under. I, in turn, accused her of being ungrateful, of taking me for granted. The words, once spoken, hung in the air between us, ugly and irrevocable. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and exhaustion. "I think we should break up." The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the air out of my lungs, but as the initial shock subsided, a strange sense of relief washed over me. She was right, we couldn't go on like this. The love we had once shared had been eroded by stress and resentment, leaving behind a hollow shell. "I think you're right," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "It's for the best." In the days that followed, a fragile truce settled over the house. We moved around each other like ghosts, careful not to make eye contact, our conversations limited to polite, impersonal exchanges. The silence was heavy, but it was better than the constant fighting. I started to imagine a future without her, a future where I could come home to a peaceful house, where I could cook a simple meal without fear of criticism. The thought was both sad and liberating, but then came the conversation I hadn't anticipated. I had assumed naively that she would start making plans to move out. When a week had passed with no mention of it, I decided to bring it up. I found her in the living room, surrounded by her books, the familiar frown of concentration on her face. "Megan," I began, my heart pounding in my chest, "we need to talk about what's next." She looked up, her eyes wary. What do you mean? I mean, I said, choosing my words carefully, now that we're not together anymore, I think it's time for you to find a new place to live. The color drained from her face. You're kicking me out. I'm not kicking you out, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. I'm just saying that it's not healthy for us to keep living together. We need to move on. Her eyes filled with tears. But I have nowhere to go, she whispered. If I have to move, I'll have to drop out of school. Is that what you want? Her words were a punch to the gut. The last thing I wanted was to see her fail. But as I looked at her, a new, unsettling thought began to take root in my mind. Was this genuine fear, or was it a calculated attempt to manipulate me? The line between the two had become so blurred I couldn't tell the difference anymore. And that, more than anything, was a sign that our relationship was truly over. The days following our conversation were a strange and unsettling dance of avoidance and forced civility. We were two strangers sharing a roof, each of us tiptoeing around the other, careful not to disturb the fragile peace. The house, once a symbol of our shared dreams, now felt like a cage, trapping us in a state of suspended animation. I found myself seeking refuge in the quiet corners of the house, the garage, the backyard, anywhere I could escape the suffocating weight of her presence. I tried to be fair. I knew her situation was precarious. Her mother and stepfather, free spirits who had embraced the nomadic lifestyle of full-time RVers, were currently somewhere in the sun-drenched landscapes of Arizona, their exact location a mystery. Her friends, most of whom were also struggling to make ends meet, didn't have the space or the resources to take her in. And the inheritance from her grandmother, a sum that had once seemed so substantial, had been swallowed whole by the insatiable appetite of her university's tuition fees. I understood her desperation, I truly did, but my empathy was at war with my own need for self-preservation. I gave her 45 days, a full 2 weeks more than the 30 days required by law. I thought it was a generous offer, a gesture of goodwill that would allow her to find a new place without upending her life completely. I even offered to help her look, to scour the online listings for affordable apartments, to lend her my car for viewings. I wanted to be the good guy, the one who handled the breakup with grace and compassion. But my offer was met with a stony silence, a wall of resentment that I couldn't seem to penetrate. As the days turned into weeks, a new and more insidious tension began to creep into the house. Megan's initial panic seemed to morph into a kind of passive resistance. She made no effort to pack, no mention of looking for a new place. Her books remained spread across the kitchen table, her clothes still hung in the closet next to mine, her toothbrush still sat in the holder next to my own. It was as if she had decided that if she simply ignored the situation, it would go away. Her behavior became increasingly erratic. One day, she would be cold and distant, refusing to even acknowledge my presence. The next, she would be overly friendly, trying to engage me in conversations about her day, as if nothing had changed between us. She started cooking again, leaving plates of food for me on the counter, a gesture that felt less like an act of kindness and more like a desperate attempt to remind me of the life we had once shared. One evening, I came home to find her in the kitchen, a bottle of wine open on the counter, a hopeful smile on her face. I was thinking, she said, her voice bright and cheerful, maybe we could talk, really talk, about us. I leaned against the doorframe, my heart sinking. Megan, I said, my voice weary, there is no us anymore. Her smile faltered. But don't you think we owe it to ourselves to at least try to work things out? We had something special, didn't we? Her words were a carefully chosen arrow, aimed directly at the softest, most vulnerable part of my heart. But as I looked at her, I saw not a woman who was genuinely interested in rekindling our love, but a woman who was terrified of losing her safety net. Her plea felt hollow, a performance designed to manipulate my emotions. What we had is over, I said, my voice firm, and I think it's time for you to accept that. The hopeful light in her eyes died, replaced by a cold, hard anger. You're really going to do this, aren't you? She said, her voice dripping with venom. You're going to throw me out on the street just like that. I'm not throwing you out, I said, my patience finally snapping. I'm asking you to respect the fact that we are no longer in a relationship. I'm asking you to give me the space I need to move on with my life. The argument that followed was a bitter rehash of all our previous fights, a toxic cocktail of accusations and recriminations. She accused me of being selfish, of abandoning her in her time of need. I accused her of using me, of manipulating my feelings to her own advantage. The words were like daggers, each one sharper and more painful than the last. In the aftermath of the fight, a new and more oppressive silence descended upon the house. The pretense of civility was gone, replaced by an open hostility that was almost palpable. We were no longer just two strangers sharing a roof. We were adversaries, locked in a silent battle of wills. I started to feel like a prisoner in my own home. I'd come home from work and go straight to my room, locking the door behind me. I'd eat my meals in silence, my eyes fixed on the television, desperate to drown out the sound of her moving around in the other room. The house, my sanctuary, had become a war zone. I knew I couldn't go on like this. The emotional toll was becoming unbearable. I was constantly on edge, my stomach in a permanent knot of anxiety. My work was suffering, my friendships were fraying. I was a ghost in my own life, haunted by the presence of a woman who refused to let me go. I realized then that I had to take a stand. I had to be the one to break the stalemate. I had to be the one to say, enough is enough. The thought of the confrontation that lay ahead filled me with a cold dread, but I knew it was a battle I had to fight. My future, my sanity, depended on it. The 45-day deadline I had given Megan came and went, and still she made no move to leave. The house had become a silent battlefield, each of us entrenched in our own corner, the air thick with a tension so heavy it felt like I was breathing water. I was living in a state of constant anxiety, my sleep plagued by nightmares of a future in which she was a permanent fixture in my life, a ghost haunting the halls of my grandmother's house. I knew I had to do something, but the thought of another confrontation filled me with a paralyzing dread. I had always been a conflict-avoidant person, preferring to smooth over disagreements rather than face them head-on, but I was at my breaking point. The emotional toll of living with my ex-girlfriend was becoming unbearable. I was a stranger in my own home, a prisoner in a life I no longer recognized. One Saturday morning, I woke up with a new sense of resolve. I couldn't go on like this. I had to take back my life, my home, my peace of mind. I found Megan in the living room, curled up on the sofa with a textbook, a cup of tea steaming on the coffee table in front of her. She looked so comfortable, so at home, that a fresh wave of anger washed over me. "Megan," I said, my voice colder and harder than I had intended, "we need to talk." She looked up, her expression a mixture of surprise and annoyance. "I'm studying," she said, as if that were a sufficient reason to dismiss me. "I don't care," I said, my voice rising. "This can't wait. The 45 days are up. You need to leave." She closed her book with a snap, her eyes flashing with defiance. "And I told you," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "I have nowhere to go. What part of that don't you understand?" "I understand that you're in a tough spot," I said, trying to rein in my anger. "But that's not my problem anymore. We're not a couple. I'm not responsible for you." "Not your problem," she scoffed, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "After everything I've done for you, after all the sacrifices I've made for this relationship." Her words were so absurd, so completely detached from reality that I couldn't help but laugh. It was a bitter, humorless sound that seemed to echo in the silent room. "Sacrifices?" I repeated, my voice incredulous. "What sacrifices have you made? I'm the one who's been supporting you, paying the bills, cooking the meals, cleaning the house. I'm the one who's put my life on hold so that you could pursue your dreams." The truth of my words, spoken aloud for the first time, seemed to hang in the air between us, a stark and undeniable indictment of her behavior. For a moment she looked stunned, as if she had never considered the situation from my perspective. But the flicker of understanding in her eyes was quickly extinguished, replaced by a familiar look of self-pity. "You think it's been easy for me," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "You have no idea what it's like to be so completely dependent on someone else. You have no idea how humiliating it is to have to ask for money for every little thing." "I never made you feel humiliated," I said, my voice softening slightly. "I was happy to support you, I was proud of you, but you took my support for granted. You treated me like a servant in my own home, and then you broke up with me. You can't have it both ways, Megan. You can't end the relationship and still expect me to take care of you." Tears streamed down her face, but for the first time they had no effect on me. I saw them for what they were, a last, desperate attempt to manipulate me, to play on my sympathy. I had been a fool for so long, blinded by a love that had long since died, but now my eyes were wide open. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice firm and unwavering. "But you have to go. I've given you more than enough time. If you're not out by the end of the week, I'm going to have to take legal action." The threat of legal action, a step I had never imagined I would have to take, hung in the air between us, a final, irrevocable severing of the ties that had once bound us together. The color drained from her face, her expression a mixture of shock and disbelief. She had pushed me too far, and now she was finally facing the consequences. She didn't say another word. She simply stood up, her body rigid with anger, and walked out of the room. I stood there for a long time, my heart pounding in my chest, a strange mixture of fear and relief washing over me. The battle was far from over, but I had finally found the courage to fight for myself, and in that moment I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that I was going to be okay. The final week was a blur of tense silence and frantic activity. Megan finally seemed to accept that I was serious. The defiance in her eyes was replaced by a quiet resignation. She spent hours on the phone, her voice a low murmur as she pleaded with friends and family, anyone who would listen, for a place to stay. I tried to stay out of her way, to give her the space she needed to make her arrangements. But the house was small, and her presence was a constant, oppressive weight. She started packing, her movements slow and deliberate, as if each item she placed in a box was a painful reminder of the life she was leaving behind. I watched her from a distance, a strange mixture of pity and relief churning in my stomach. I didn't want to see her suffer, but I knew that her departure was the only way for either of us to heal. One afternoon, I came home to find her sitting on the front porch, surrounded by a mountain of cardboard boxes. Her face was pale and drawn, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. She looked so small and vulnerable that a pang of guilt shot through me. "I found a place," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "A room for rent in a house with 3 other people. It's not much, but it's all I can afford." "I'm glad," I said, my voice gentle. "I'm really glad you found something." She looked up at me, her eyes searching my face for something I couldn't give her. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice cracking. "I'm sorry for everything." The apology, when it finally came, was a quiet, simple thing, but it was the most honest and genuine words she had spoken to me in months. It was an acknowledgement of the pain she had caused, a recognition of the part she had played in the unraveling of our relationship. "I'm sorry too," I said, and I meant it. I was sorry for the way things had ended, for the love we had lost, for the hurt we had inflicted on each other. The next day, a beat-up pickup truck, borrowed from a friend, pulled into the driveway. Megan and I loaded her boxes in silence, the only sound the scraping of cardboard on the truck bed. When the last box was loaded, she turned to me, her eyes filled with a sadness that mirrored my own. "Well," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears, "I guess this is it." "I guess so," I said, my own voice hoarse with emotion. She hesitated for a moment, as if she wanted to say something more, but then she simply turned and walked away, climbing into the passenger seat of the truck without a backward glance. I stood in the driveway and watched as the truck pulled away, a cloud of dust billowing in its wake, and then she was gone. I walked back into the house, the silence that greeted me a stark and welcome relief. The air felt lighter, the rooms brighter. I walked from room to room, taking in the emptiness, the absence of her things, the ghost of her presence already beginning to fade. In the weeks that followed, I slowly began to reclaim my life. I rearranged the furniture, painted the walls, and filled the house with the things that brought me joy. I started cooking again, experimenting with new recipes, rediscovering the simple pleasure of creating a meal for myself. I reconnected with friends, went to the movies, and took long drives in the country with the windows down and the music blasting. I didn't hear from Megan for a long time. Then one day, about 6 months after she had moved out, I received a letter in the mail. It was a short, simple note written in her familiar, elegant script. She told me that she had finished her master's program and had found a job in her field. She was happy, she said, and she hoped that I was happy too. I read the letter with a sense of closure, a quiet satisfaction that we had both managed to find our way to a better place. The anger and resentment I had once felt for her had long since faded, replaced by a gentle, wistful sadness for the love we had lost. The house, my grandmother's house, is my sanctuary once more. It is a place of peace and solitude, a place where I can be myself without fear of judgment or criticism. The scars of the past have faded, but they have not disappeared entirely. They are a part of my story, a reminder of the lessons I have learned, the pain I have overcome. And in a strange way, I am grateful for them. They have made me stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. They have taught me the importance of setting boundaries, of standing up for myself, of never again losing myself in the shadow of someone else's dreams.